So honestly, I went into this film pretty cold. I didn't watch any teaser trailers. I didn't watch a full-length trailer because growing up as a kid, I love horror, y'all. I love supernatural horror in particular. So I always get excited about a new werewolf movie, about a new vampire movie, about a new movie about Dracula. So when I heard the premise of this film, Dracula on a ship, what can go wrong? What's going on, movie fans, and welcome back to my channel. Elliot here with a brand new movie review, and today we're discussing the new supernatural horror film by the name of The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Now, I had the opportunity to check this out a couple days early, and I'm gonna let y'all know by the end of this review if I think this film is worth checking out in theaters. But first, I want to talk to my horror fans in the comment section. Let me know if you all were excited to check out this movie, and of course, once you've seen it, let's talk about the pros and the cons. But also, if you are a fan of Dracula like myself, why don't you list some of your favorite Dracula projects in the comments below. So if you are subscribed to the channel, which I hope you are, I released my out of theater reaction last night and it was a mixed review for me. But as I said in that video, I want to come back, give you my full length review, speaking more on the positives, but also talking more about the negatives. So here we are. So with that being said, let's jump into my thoughts, and I want to start off with the positives, and I want to talk about the productional value of this film because I found this film to be really well made. Whether we have moments of being on the ocean and how we are on this ship and how everything just felt like it was handcrafted to perfection, very detailed, very authentic to the time period, the way that the costumes fitted, the way that the characters are speaking to one another, reacting to certain things, it felt very well made, as well as just jumping to tonally speaking. This is a very moody movie. It is gothic, it is gloomy, it is dreadful, it's very atmospheric. So from a productional standpoint, it looks really well made. Tonally, it is very consistent, which I really appreciated. And yes, that is all credit to a great production team, whether it's the set design, the hair and makeup department, the cinematographer, the composer to really set the mood with the score of the movie. But also, you have to have a good director with a good eye. And we have a really solid director who I'm a fan of, whether it's his 2016 film, The Autopsy of Jane Doe, which is a great horror film for my horror fans out there that haven't seen it, and I highly recommend that movie. But I say all that to say, the director has a style, he has an eye, he has a great sensibility of setting the mood and the tone. So I'm very much a fan of how the film looked for the most part from a productional standpoint. But I also want to give praise to the performances because, as I said in my out of theater reaction, the story, as we'll talk about later, isn't the best, but it's the performances that elevate that story. Starting off with the lead of this film, who is Corey Hawkins, who plays Clemens, who's the doctor of this film. And as you'll see with the movie, he has his own reasons why he's on this ship, and he has this ideology of how he wants to change the world and how that plays into this narrative. I thought was a really good arc for the character. But just a side note here, I really enjoyed Corey's performance, but I am a fan of Corey Hawkins as an actor, and I really like the way he's shaping up his career. You look at my first time seeing him with the being Dr. Dre and Straight Outta Compton. Then he jumps into a big film like Kong Skull Island. Then he jumps into a Spike Lee Black Klansman. Then he gets into a blockbuster with Michael Bay and Six Underground. And then you have movies like The Tragedy of Macbeth. And then you have this. And then you have The Color Purple later this year. So I like Corey a lot, and I thought he was really great in this film. But also you have some great supporting performances, whether it be Ashley Franciosi, who plays Anna. Now, I don't want to get too much away about her character because there's a very mysterious nature to what she does in this film, but she was in a film called The Nightingale from Jennifer Kent a couple years. She is great at playing mysterious, but also vulnerable, but also tough, and she's really great in this movie. Even though she doesn't have that much screen time, when she is on screen, you feel her presence. But also, for any of my Game of Thrones fans out there, we also have Cunningham in this film, who plays Captain Elliot, and I really enjoyed another character that isn't in it as much as I wished he would have been, because I'm a fan of him as an actor, but I really enjoyed his presence and just kind of his vulnerabilities and just him as a captain of the ship, but also paired with his young companion, his grandson in the film, played by Woody Norman, who plays Toby in this film. I like that kid who plays the kid Toby. He's really great in this movie, but also he was in a film I reviewed a couple weeks ago called Cobweb, and he's a young up-and-coming actor. He's been in some really good horror films recently, and I really like that kid. He's really great in this movie. He has a really good, great, sad moment in this film that I really enjoy. So the performances, again, the story, the script, not the greatest, and we'll talk about that more in depth later, but I like how the performances really feel well-rounded, and you feel the nuance and the kind of truth to these characters, like the actors believe in what their characters are doing, which I really appreciated. But some final points that I want to mention: this is a horror film with Dracula. I thought that some of the kill sequences were very effective. I like how the film takes advantage of Dracula and how he hunts his prey and the ways he uses deceptiveness to lure them in, to suck their blood. So I liked some of the moments with the kills with Dracula, but also I will mention, speaking of, I was very surprised by how far this film went with not necessarily how the kills were handled, but what they do with certain characters and how they kill them off was like, it kind of caught me by surprise. I believe this is rated R, and when you see the film, you'll understand what I'm referring to about, like, oh, they're going there, huh? So I do applaud some of the more darkness to the narrative and some of the kills that we have in this film. So those are my main pros. Let's get into some of my criticisms here. Now, this is based on a chapter of the Dracula novel, and at times you can feel that they took advantage of like the creative direction of the film, which I applaud, but there's goodness in a chapter of a book. But when you have to stretch it out for 2 hours, that's when this film kind of felt short to me, because I felt it was repetitive at points and really unnecessary dive into some of the more secondary plots to make this a 2-hour runtime, which I didn't feel like it needed to be 2 hours. Like, I think there is a really excellent hour and a half version of this film without really fluffing it out, dragging things on. So again, great premise for a chapter of a novel, but when you have to stretch it out, you feel some of the weight kind of bogging down the story. But also, sticking to that point, that leads me into, you're trapped on a ship with Dracula. That can only take you so far, because you feel like the characters aren't reacting properly to the situation, or the plot sometimes feels like the characters are making illogical decisions just to make the plot move forward. And there are many moments in this film where I'm like, why would you do that? Who would think that that's a good idea? And why are you doing this at night and not in the day? I'm going to stop there. But there were many moments where I'm like, man, this is only can go so far, right? It almost feels like it's a good short film within the premise that I just, again, feels like they dragged on certain things to make that runtime. But final points I want to mention: Dracula, the Dracula of it all, which I will admit I do like some of the look in the film. We'll talk about the look of Dracula here in a second, but not in the movie enough for my personal taste. I'm a Dracula fan. I love Dracula. I love when the Dracula, different iterations of the character, where there's layers, there's different forms of Dracula. And in this movie, we only see one version for the most part of Dracula, and that's the savage nature, the beast of the character, which it has its moments, but I love a multifaceted Dracula. I love multiple layers with Dracula, and we only get one side of the character, which felt a little short for me. And again, they're not in the movie as much as I personally would have liked to see Dracula wreaking havoc. But talking about the look of Dracula, now there's a good amount of the film, especially when there's close-ups of the character, where you can tell it's practical effects. There's an actor that plays Dracula, and I like the physicality of the actor. But then you can also tell where there's like certain shots of Dracula in the air and whatnot, and certain quick movements where it's like, those are visual effects, that's CGI. And not that it looked bad, but the visual effects, I prefer practicality 100% of the time, right? And I understand sometimes you got to cut corners to kind of make it fit within what you're trying to accomplish, but it took me out of the film when we saw the more obvious CGI VFX of the character, which again took me out of certain scenes and made it less menacing, made it less scary to see Dracula on screen. But final point I want to mention here, going back to what I mentioned about the Dracula of it all, I wish there was just more of Dracula, more of the deceitfulness of the character. Like, there are moments where he's in some of the characters' heads, but I wish we would have leaned more into the lore, the mythology, more dialogue, more tricks, more moments of seeing the character at its height of his power versus kind of getting to where this film is getting at with the character. So again, I'm a Dracula fanatic, and I just wish that there was more to the character. And then one more thing I want to mention, this might be a slight spoiler, so I'm going to put it on the screen now, spoiler warning, and I'll remove it once I'm done spoiling it. So you have been warned. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. the ending of the movie, without getting too much into the weeds, but the idea of let's attack Dracula at nighttime and let's sink the ship. Like, okay, sure. Why didn't anyone think of the idea of doing that in the daytime? Why wouldn't they set that bitch on fire in the daytime when Dracula is in his bed and they knew where he was and they waited to nighttime? That was just going back to, I said, illogical decisions. Those are one of the decisions that just baffled me in the movie. So, and there's also some other things, like I thought that they should have made the captain's second command like being like a Renfield character and working for Dracula the whole time. There's many other things that I'm like, oh, I wish they would have went that direction. But spoiler warning, that's something that I did not like about the film towards the end. But hey, those are the pros, those are the cons. Before I give you all my overall thoughts, if you stuck around to the point in the review, I really appreciate you all. If you're having a good time, because I'm certainly am, hit the like button, consider sharing, and also consider subscribing to the channel. With that being said, overall, The Last Voyage of the Demeter does a good job of creating a creepy atmospheric environment and stays consistent within its tone. I really enjoyed the performances for the most part, because I feel like they elevated a very bland narrative, but as a chapter of a novel, that works. But when you look at it as a full-length 2-hour feature film, that's where I feel the story kind of let down. Wanted more Dracula, wanted to see more of the character, and being in the confined space, there really is some limitations with the story. I'm going to give the Demeter movie a 2.8 out of 5. Now, it's not trash. It's not something I wouldn't recommend, but I would lower the expectations, and I would say if you are not a fan of horror, this would be like a good starter pack for a horror movie. Like, it's not too scary at all to me, and it doesn't really do too many things to make you like terrified. So I think this is a good starter pack for like a newbie to horror films. But for someone like myself that loves horror, love Dracula, it was kind of disappointing. That's why, again, I gave it a 2.8 out of 5. So hey, that's my thoughts. Share yours in the comments below. Once you've seen the film, let's talk about your pros, but also your cons. And if you stuck around to my little spoiler portion, let me know what you thought about all of that. But again, you all are awesome. Hope you appreciate today's review. Before we wrap things up, again, I want to thank you all and just remind you to like, share, comment, and consider subscribing to the channel. We'll catch you all on the next breakdown. Thank you again for watching today's video.